Hello my Animaniacs, and welcome to another episode of B-Movie Enema, the series. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and with me, as always, is my trusty companion and partner, Nurse Disembodied. Nurse, how goes it?
It goes, Jeff. It goes.
Oh, good to hear. Now, say, Nurse.
What's the haps, Jeff?
Do you have any fears or phobias?
Outside of languishing away forever as an animated character that's probably a figment of your imagination on a show that hardly anyone watches?
What?
What?
Phobias, fears, things that give you the giblies. Do you have any of those?
Oh, I don't know. I don't love clowns. Not a big fan of nuclear war. I'm terrified of locking my keys in my car. I wouldn't want to find myself in Hackensack, New Jersey without the first bus ticket out of there. The thought of having Malort again makes me want to gag, and Star Wars fans are a little intense for my tastes, but I don't think I have that many fears. What about you?
I mean, outside from the usual spiders, drowning, dying alone, I'd have to say I've been losing some sleep lately over the inevitable reemergence of...
Well, hello again, Jeffrey. I told you I would be returning sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that.
I see you've selected a film by directing giant John Huston. Could this be The Treasure of the Sierra Madre? Or, maybe The Maltese Falcon. If not, it is surely Key Largo.
Well, it's none of those. This week, we're taking a look at the 1980 thriller Phobia. This comes during a peculiar string of movies that Huston made in the late 70s and very early 80s. After he had another massively appreciated hit, The Man Who Would Be King, and before he'd make Prizzi's Honor 10 years later, there's some pretty weird titles on Huston's filmography.
Yes, this was a peculiar time. I believe it was Gene Siskel who felt Wiseblood was a little too smart for its own good. It was certainly released to a mixed reception.
Oh, really? I mean, it's part of the Criterion Collection.
It is?
Oh yeah, and The Guardian wrote in a retrospective that Wiseblood was brilliantly adapted.
Well, what do you know? Wiseblood is a Criterion film. Very deservedly so. It is a brilliant film. I think I shall buy that now and prepare a lecture on the perfection of that film.
Yeah, you do that. Say, Nurse, do you think I dodged a bullet there?
Maybe. I guess it just depends.
We'll see. Anyway, I do know something else about this movie. Not only is it directed by one of the biggest and best directors in the history of film, but it also starred Paul Michael Glaser. Now, Glaser would go on to be a director in his own right. He made the films The Running Man, The Cutting Edge, and Kazam. But his first movie was a film that we previously mentioned earlier this season, Fiddler on the Roof. However, Glaser is best known for playing Detective David Starsky in the 70s cop TV series Starsky and Hutch. He partnered with his co-star David Soul, the titular cop Richard Hutchison, as they worked the streets of Southern California as detectives. Now, Hutch was the Minnesota transplant who was a little more intellectual in his detective work, while Starsky was the Brooklyn native who was much more streetwise and willing to get a little more physical if necessary. Starsky and Hutch was probably even better known for two other things that appeared in the show. First, the beautiful bright red Ford Gran Torino with the big white swooshing stripe that belonged to Starsky, and second, their usual street informant Huggy Bear, played by Antonio Fargas, who dressed up like a pimp but ran a bar in the fictional Bay City, California. In Phobia, Glaser is playing Dr. Peter Ross. He's a psychiatrist who has a nifty new therapy to treat patients who have intense phobias of different things. However, those patients start showing up dead, and the thrilling horror mystery unfolds in this 1980 chiller. And we'll see that play out during the course of the movie. Okay, Nurse, maybe we should get things started. What do you think?
I agree. Hopefully we'll get a chance to face our fears and figure out a way to overcome some phobias ourselves.
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't really plan on sending you to Hackensack and abandoning you there during the course of these next 2 hours. As for me, I'm pretty sure that I've already faced and gotten rid of my problem.
Jeffrey, I think I should stick around and watch this movie with you. It might prove beneficial for future lectures on John Huston.
Oh, fuck! Alright, so we meet Dr. Peter Ross, played by Glazer. Now, he's conducting significant experimentation on the treatment of severe phobias in his patients. Now, Ross seems to be conducting these experiments using two similar forms of systematic desensitization techniques. And the primary form of systematic desensitization therapy is to simply have people be confronted or placed in the same space as what they fear. For example, nurse, that would be if we locked you in a room with one of those jerk-ass Star Wars fans and asked them what they think of, I don't know, Kelly Marie Tran or Moses Ingram.
If you do that, I would kick you in the balls pretty much the instant you let me out of that room.
You know, fair enough. Anyway, so yeah, it's basically just...
And I would stick you in a room with a bunch of spiders. And teach you to mess with me.
Okay. Well, anyway, yeah, so he's treating one woman who has a fear of crowded spaces. And I always look at that fear as being a combination of agoraphobia, the fear of being without a place to escape, and claustrophobia, the fear of being in a cramped space. And he has her go to the subway and ride the subway in a crowded train car. This, naturally, freaks her out. So she needs to go see Dr. Ross, but he's playing hockey. She sees his file cabinet drawer with her name on it and...
Kablamo!
Yes, ma'am. It's wired to explode. Now, the cops say that it was supposed to be him to explode from that bomb and not his patient. So, the mystery and intrigue begins.
I'm gonna go ahead and suspect Dr. Toland. She seems off.
Yeah, that's Patricia Collins. Now, she's still around, but currently retired from acting. While she did do some movies here and there, she was mostly a television actress, appearing in several series and movies. Dr. Toland appears to have had a history with Dr. Ross, and I guess they dated for a while. We saw at the beginning of the movie where she's asking if they can remain friends, and like anyone who seems to have called off a relationship and seemingly not really a jerk, he says that, yeah, sure. Yet she still seems off.
Boy, you said it. I don't think she likes how he took her to an exhibition of a sculptor who is a younger, prettier girl, and Dr. Ross is now with her.
Yeah, she seems to be a bit sour to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So speaking of that younger girlfriend, that's Susan Hogan. Now, the year before Phobia, she was in David Cronenberg's chilling movie The Brood, where she plays a potential new love interest for Art Hindle's Frank Carveth and a victim of Frank's estranged wife Nola's rage. She's still working today and has been on some pretty popular TV shows herself, including DC's Legends of Tomorrow, as well as Supergirl, and in Battlestar Galactica. Now, I do think that she might have been in a bunch of those Hallmark or Lifetime type holiday movies, because she has a bunch of movies in her filmography with the word Christmas in it.
Hey man, whatever pays the bills.
Indeed. The other form of phobia treatment it seems that Dr. Ross partakes in is what's called virtual reality therapy. This is when it would be otherwise pretty dangerous or plainly unethical to force someone to physically confront their fears. Like, if someone has a fear of heights, it might not be a good idea to take them to the top of the Sears Tower and dangle them off the building. So you can create an immersive way to still create the same effect without putting them in actual danger. In some ways, I see that big screen used with Ross, he sees his patients seem to be kind of similar VR scenario, but that way he doesn't have to throw a person off a building or anything.
Dr. Ross seems to have lots of problems of his own.
Yeah, he kind of does, doesn't it? He's got an ex-girlfriend who's also a colleague. He's got a new girlfriend who showed a little jealousy about Dr. Toland. He doesn't want to be smothered by the ladies, and now he's got a person trying to kill him. And on top of that, there's a cop, Inspector Barnes, who's also nosing around. Why is that? Well, Besides that bomb seemed to be meant for Ross, his volunteers for some of his treatments are all incarcerated criminals, and that doesn't sit too well with the inspector. Plus, considering Ross is a bit of a psychology celebrity as of late, as his studies are getting quite a bit of notice. So Inspector Barnes is played by John Colicos. Now, Colicos was in some interesting things at this stage of his career. Just the year before, he appeared in a low-budget British-Canadian production of King Solomon's Treasure, playing Alan Quatermain. Now, don't get me wrong and all, but I'm not too sure I'd expect John Colicos to be an action hero. But anyway, he would also be in the moody, atmospheric ghost movie The Changeling with George C. Scott in 1980. Then, in 1981, he'd show up as Nick Papadakis in Bob Rafelson's remake of The Postman Always Rings Twice. He's the husband to Jessica Lange that she and Jack Nicholson kill so that they can run away together. But of course, I know Bob Rafelson best for Nurse?
Being one of the co-creators of the Monkees?
Bingo! Anyway, Rafelson had...
Ah yes, Mr. Bob Rafelson.
Oh, Jesus fuck, I forgot you were still here, Dick.
I did not mean to startle you, Jeffrey. Anyway, you mentioned Bob Rafelson, and of course we should point out his incredibly harrowing 5 Easy Pieces, that also star Jack Nicholson. Surely, Jeffrey, we will take time to go over some of Rafelson's achievements in this segment. Yes?
Yeah, sure, Dick. Knock yourself out.
Excellent! Bob Rafelson was born in 1933 to a Jewish family. He would go on to produce Easy Rider, a seminal counterculture film that would have ripple effects through the 70s. He then directed 5 Easy Pieces and received great acclaim for the tough story about a man trying to reconnect with his father one last time. From there he would produce The Last Picture Show, about teens growing up in a town on the verge of dying. He would return to the director's chair for The King of Marvin Gardens. Again, this would be met by wide critical acclaim. His next film would be an interesting step for him. He'd go on to direct Stay Hungry, starring Sally Field and Jeff Bridges, while featuring a not yet famous Arnold Schwarzenegger. Rafelson would then be a little less engaged in the 80s and 90s, but did make a brief cameo as a restaurant patron in the marvelously morose Leaving Las Vegas.
Should we tell him that it's time to go back to the movie?
No, let him think that he's contributing or something.
If you say so.
Oh, I do say so. Oh, before I was so rudely interrupted by Dick over there, I was going to say that John Colicos would appear in the very first episode of Star Trek to feature the Klingons, Errand of Mercy.
Oh God, between him droning on about this Rafelson guy and you having to bring up Star Trek again, I am very close to taking the rest of the day off.
And so, that's the true effect of Bob Rafelson. Jeffrey, should we be returning to the movie?
Well, I think we still have a few minutes before we need to do that.
Oh, well, maybe we can unpack the importance of Dennis Hopper and the counterculture era.
No. No. I think we got it.
Oh, okay, I see. That is just fine. Continue on.
Thanks, Dick. So I do have to wonder exactly how ethical anything here is. First, the hospital allows Inspector Barnes to listen in on the group session. That seems dicey. Never mind the doctor-patient confidentiality thing. Each member of the group is revealing kind of sensitive information about themselves. Now, I don't think that any of them flat out says anything specific, but this is the type of stuff that could potentially incriminate them.
Then, the inspector guy picks one of the members of the group to interrogate him by beating the absolute crap out of him.
Yeah, so this guy was a safecracker, and he knows how to make bombs. They want to find out if he had it out for Dr. Ross, but they think that he lied about having a fear of heights. But let's think about this for a moment. Yes, the safecrackers know how to melt and blow things up. Yes, they could be leaned on to make a bomb that could hurt someone. Safecrackers aren't always the toughest of guys. Well, I should say that not everyone on the cracker team would be the toughest of guys, but I'd like to think that a good cop, a good detective, a criminologist of any quality would immediately see the flaw that a person arrested for after cracking a safe, would then kill their doctor while using the excuse of a phobia to keep him from being completely and totally locked down in a prison every day, day after day. That just seems like bad cop work to me.
Not to mention that the inspector also says he would destroy all the work Ross had done too.
And why would he do that?
Well, he wouldn't.
Well, no. I mean, he did, in a moment of desperation, knock a cop out and take his gun and a hostage, but he was about to be steamrolled into confessing a crime he didn't commit. Now, that actor is David Bolt. Now, he didn't have too many big parts, but he was pretty busy with movies and TV shot in Canada. Most of these people in this movie are Canadian, or at least kind of came through the Canadian system, but Bolt appeared in an episode of Friday the 13th, the series. He appeared in the movie Spasms. His last role was in 2006 when he played a judge in Hollywoodland, the movie about the TV Superman George Reeves, whose death is still maybe sort of debated whether or not he actually committed suicide. However, we talked about Susan Hogan being in Cronenberg's The Brood. Well, David Bolt appeared in Cronenberg's Videodrome. I think if you're a Canadian actor in the 70s and 80s, you'll eventually find your way into a Cronenberg film. But Bolt ends up on a beam in a gutted building several stories up. He will jump if the cops come near him. Okay, I get it. I have to imagine his trust in authority is at an all-time low. Good news, though, Dr. Ross comes to see him. Now, I like that Dr. Ross's girlfriend says that there's no net, and the inspector just says that's because he's too high up, and the net would break and wouldn't work anyway.
Dr. Ross talks to him and the guy just jumps anyways.
Yeah.
What's the matter?
Well, Dr. Ross sees the paper where it says that he failed to save his phobic patient.
Yeah?
Yeah, remember that one time when I was in the papers?
Wait, you were?
Yeah, the headline said, "Butt doctor fails to save diuretic patient from massive dumps."
Wait, when did that happen?
I don't know, like a year or so ago.
I don't remember that.
How did you forget? It was awful. He just kept pooping. It was all over the place.
Are you shitting me?
Oh, haha, yeah, what a punster you are. But no, I mean, this was all over the news. There were reporters outside. We weren't getting any new patients for a few months. It was awful. I couldn't sleep. It was a total nightmare.
Wait, nightmare? This is the nightmare you had the other night.
It was?
Yes, you woke up screaming about how there was poop everywhere.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess that's a relief.
It was a bigger relief you didn't shit the bed, too. You and your poop dreams get a little, messy.
Yeah, I'm really glad you just said that during one of our episodes for everyone to hear it.
Can't you just edit it out?
Editing?
Ugh, never mind.
Anyway, I thought we agreed to say they get intense, not messy.
I don't ever remember agreeing to that.
Oh, how about that scene in which Dr. Ross shows that one girl a rape video and tells her it's her being manhandled? That seems a little less than ethical.
Well, I thought we had a few minutes left before getting back to the movie. I could have used this time to talk about such amazing works like Rebel Without a Cause, True Grit, Apocalypse Now, and oh gosh, the great David Lynch's Blue Velvet.
Oh yeah, about that.
Whatever do you mean, Jeffrey?
You see, the thing is...
What thing? What are you holding back from me?
So, Dick, how do I put this?
Put what?
You talked through the movie earlier. We returned to the movie while you went on that long, drawn-out diatribe.
That feels offensive.
Well, that's how I meant it. See, we're making new breakthroughs every time we see each other, Dick. We get to share our emotions so much more freely now. And so we reach the end of the 1980 thriller Phobia. After originally believing that Henry Owen was the killer, that was the guy played by David Bolt, the coppers shift their suspicion to young Johnny Venuti. Now, Johnny took off on the run, worried that he and the last surviving patient, Bubba, would be the next two to die. They suspect him because the girl scared of men, Laura, was drowned in the hospital's therapy tub. Now, Johnny is then dispatched with a black-gloved hand that prevents the elevator from stopping, and he's crushed when it goes all the way up. Now the cops, running out of possible suspects, decide that Dr. Ross has to be the killer. After all, he had training in demolition from the Vietnam War. Inspector Barnes also states that the front desk just simply don't notice him coming and going because he does so often. The inspector also discovers that Ross keeps a gun in his desk at work. And because of all this trouble, the hospital shuts down the whole immersion therapy study. Bubba will be going back to prison, and Ross is finished.
Sure does seem like his old girlfriend should benefit most from Dr. Ross being thrown out.
It sure does, but in the final minutes, we learn that Dr. Ross had a sister who drowned, which caused him to be scared of water. When his father threw him into the water to teach him how to swim, he saw it as punishment. So he carried guilt with him, which attracted him to the inmates who were also guilty of something. But yeah, Bubba was the final victim who died from being bitten by a rattlesnake. Dr. Ross was indeed the killer, and it was sort of a lackluster reveal. He set everything up to basically punish these inmates.
What would happen if that one lady didn't go to his place and open his file cabinet to be blown up?
I don't know.
What would happen if the one guy didn't get arrested or didn't bust free and go on that chase for him to fall off that building? I assume Dr. Ross expected him to run away from the cops and go to a high perch.
Well, Ross did say that all he had to do was tell that guy to look down.
What about that girl getting drowned? Would she just get killed any old way that just proved to be the easiest? Okay, that Johnny guy was told to go to the lady's apartment. Did Dr. Ross call the cops to make it so he would run and put himself on top of the elevator for Ross to kill him by crushing him? How did he know he was going to be on top of the elevator? Did he just use that because it conveniently worked out that way?
Beats me. I mean, this movie did not get very good reviews, and it probably wouldn't surprise you if you give this movie too much thought. However, I would say that Phobia is kind of a late-wave North American giallo. It's got an unseen killer. It's not exactly sensical. Well, at the very least, some things are purposely left vague and off-screen, so you can use that to help propel you over the leaps of logic that you have to take narratively to get to Ross being the villain. It's got a hard-edged inspector who tosses blame around like crazy. I'm convinced that this is giallo. And the most interesting thing is that this does indeed come from one of the greatest American directors of all time, John Huston.
I must say I was curious if we were ever going to talk about him.
Well then, why don't you just take it away?
Well, gladly. John Huston was born in the early years of the 20th century to a pair of quite interesting parents. His father, Walter, was an actor and was known for being in vaudeville. His mother was a sports editor for different publications. It was not common that a woman in the early 1900s was that knowledgeable enough about sports to edit magazines and newspapers and such. That is fascinating. However, that relationship he had with his mother might have had a large impact on how he held relationships with women. Some thought he was almost haunted by his mother in many ways. But watching his father perform acts in vaudeville helped him be drawn to acting in the arts. His career in film started as a writer in the 1930s. Then, in 1941, his directorial debut, The Maltese Falcon, became one of the greatest film noirs ever. Over the next 15 years, Huston would go on to direct several memorable classics. 1948's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, for which he won the Oscars for Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay, and also Key Largo. 1951's The Red Badge of Courage and The African Queen. 1952's Moulin Rouge, and 1956 Moby Dick. In that run, he picked up a total of 9 Academy Award nominations in one of the most dominant eras for anyone in Hollywood.
But he wasn't just done there. Oh no, he would still get 4 more Oscar nominations. The most notable movies he would be involved in the later years of his career were for acting in Chinatown as the villainous Noah Cross, and directing The Man Who Would Be King in 1976 and Prizzi's Honor in 1985. However, I don't know if we could say that every single movie down the line is a classic. He was one of the 5 directors working on 1967's Casino Royale.
I do think the less said about that, the better. Even Woody Allen could not save that one.
And maybe the less said about Woody Allen, the better, too.
Oh, most definitely.
And then there's Phobia. I couldn't tell you a single reason why he made this movie. Maybe this was a work for hire. Maybe he really did want to try his hand at making a giallo. After all, you could almost say that spiritually, the giallo and the film noir subgenres are at least cousins.
How very astute, Jeffrey. It is often stated that a unifying link in all of Huston's films concerns some sort of quest by the lead characters. Oftentimes they were failed quests. They could also involve characters that survived simply because they sacrificed for truth and independence. Sometimes the quest would be for lovers to bond against the rest of the world. Sometimes there were heroic quests, and I think maybe that's where Phobia falls into the pantheon of Huston's work.
Yeah, I'm going to need you to spell that out for me.
Well, in many of Huston's heroic quest movies, the so-called hero would have questionable techniques or motives. Here, in Phobia, Huston has Dr. Ross, who is solving criminality one person at a time. He will either cure them of their phobias, and make them at least somewhat valuable to society, or he will kill them when they refuse to be healed. It's a contradiction to say he is a hero because he is killing people, but in mind he is kind of, as you might say, taking out the trash.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Religion is something else that will recur in Huston's work. In Night of the Iguana, Richard Burton's sermon becomes distracted and muddled and confusing, and it causes people to leave the church. In another instance, it might be something that causes people to turn away from regular human emotions and existence, which is definitely not something Huston wanted to lose himself.
Of course, we could go on for hours about Mr. Huston's contributions, but I wanted to finish with how Huston did not follow the typical Hollywood tendency to create narrative through the editing process.
Now see, there's that word again, editing.
Your mortal enemy.
Huston did not rely on editing as much as letting the story build and take twists and turns naturally, and to be captured on film. It helped him focus on the exact look and emotion his films would depict. If I were speaking to my class, I would tell them the movies to watch to get more out of John Huston's work are The Maltese Falcon, The Treasure of Sierra Madre, The Night of the Iguana, The Man Who Would Be King, and Prizzi's Anna. Now, Jeffrey, don't you wish you got to listen in on my classes?
Not really.
Ah, well, I am disappointed, but I see.
Well, I'll tell you what, though. Give me a little bit of a break, and when you come back next time, you can bring a movie that you want me to watch, and we'll give it a go.
I would be honored. What would I pick? Do I pick something classy? Do I pick something with a little more pep to it? I must start making lists forthwith.
Geez, I'll probably regret that.
I'm regretting it already.
Yeah. Anyway, care to give your final review of Phobia, Nurse?
Absolutely. I really loved the plot of this movie. I think there's something here to do a modern update and a remake of it. This is one of those cases that you could come back to the concept and make something better than this first go-round. Don't remake something already perfect. Find something like this. Now, while I do like the plot, some of the kills were good and the general feel of the movie, I do have some quibbles. First, did they have to make Starsky play hockey? It was obvious the movie was made in Canada. The cast reeked of maple syrup, but hockey? Really? Second, the music was really bad. Real bad. It had that Hallmark and Lifetime feel to it. Get that out of there and give us some traditional scary music or something that sounds like an Italian horror movie. And finally, the movie was a tad predictable. All that said, despite it being predictable and the really bad score on the movie, it still had me watching it and not losing interest. Again, the premise is the key to this movie. There's that Bogart in the Harry Potter movies. It would take the form of whatever the worst fear was of the person seeing it. In a sort of way, Dr. Ross had Bogart wallpaper in his treatment room to show his patients their worst fears. In all, I give 1980s Phobia a solid 4 poops out of 5.
Yeah, the movie is flawed, but a 4 out of 5 is not out of the realm of possibility for this movie. But Nurse, I do know what the Bogart would turn into if you saw him.
What's that? Star Wars! Ah, fucking Star Wars fan?